welcome to my AuthorTube channel. My name is Bobbi Holmes and I'm the USA Today Bestselling Author of the Paranormal Cozy Mystery Series, Haunting Danielle. I also write under the pen name Anna J. McIntyre. Now, if you're wondering why I'm wearing a hat today, it's because I am going to explore starting a series from the middle. And the series I will be referring to is my Coulson family saga, written under my pen name Anna J. McIntyre. And if you will look at the covers on those books, each cover has a woman on it with a different hat. And so I thought I'd get in the spirit of things, and today I'm wearing a hat that if I was on the cover, this might be the one that I'd wear. So let's talk about starting a series from the middle. Starting a series from the middle isn't something that an author initially sets out to do. It typically happens when you have written a book, and after you've written the book or published the book, you think, you know, this would make a good series, but I don't want it to be the first book in the series. I want to go back in time and maybe explore the characters when they were younger, or perhaps the characters' parents or grandparents. Now, it obviously is not the best way to write a series, but it can be done, and I thought I would explain today why I happened to do it and how it worked out for me. Coulson's family saga actually began with my book Lessons. I wrote Lessons about 25 years ago. It wasn't the first book of fiction I had ever written, nor was it the first romance, but it was the first book of fiction I really seriously wanted to publish. Now, at the time when I wrote it, I was working for Havasu Palms. I was the general manager. I was very busy. But I had this idea for a book, and I would sneak away whenever I had some free time and work on it, and it was really a labor of love for me. And after it was written, I just pretty much tucked it away and went back to work because I had a pretty full life and I didn't have time to, seek out publishers. So fast forward quite a number of years, and I am getting into self-publishing, and it's right after I had I left Havasu Palms. Our life had changed a lot. I was freelance writing. I decided to try some self-publishing. So I took Lessons out of the desk drawer and I sent it off to an editor to have it professionally edited, and I had a cover design for it. Now I also had to put into a hardback. So this is the original Lessons back when I first published it, before it was part of Coulson's family saga. So after I self-published, I soon found out that it's very difficult to make it in self-publishing on standalone books. Series are what seem to really be working. Now, I really did enjoy writing Lessons, and I loved my characters, and I liked the idea of revisiting them. So I ended up writing a second book, which was, and I'll get that one here, The Senator's Secret. And this was book 2 back in those days. First we had Lessons, and then we had The Senator's Secret. And back then I just called it the Coulson series. Now, so I wrote these 2 books, and well, I just felt that I wanted to write more. I decided I wanted to go back in time because I had so many things about the characters. I had talked about how they had known each other when they were younger. So I decided to do something really crazy and expand the series and go back in time and write about the parents and the grandparents because I had mentioned them in the books. There's 2 things that you have to keep in mind when you write a series this way. The first one, you need to be very aware of all those little things that you put in your books that you've already written, books that take place after the books you haven't written yet. So if for instance, you've mentioned that a character was married or maybe had some sort of a traumatic experience that you just sort of mentioned in your books, when you go back in time, you may want to expand on those, or at least mention that they happened. You can't forget about them. You're going to have to keep all those things straight. Now, the second thing that you need to do if you are writing about a time period that's before you lived, for instance, with me, I wrote Lessons, and that took place in the current time when I was writing at that particular time. But when I went back and wrote the first books in the series, which was Coulson's Wife takes place in the very early 1900s. So that involves some research. And one of the things that I discovered when I started researching the time frame that I was writing about was the pandemic of 1918. And they were living right in an area that was hit really, really hard. So for me, with this current pandemic that's going on, I think I was a little bit more, I don't want to say aware, but a little bit more concerned that a lot of people were early on because of all the research I had done for Colson's Wife, because I had my characters live through the pandemic, and I also cited different things that actually had happened back then in the book to make it a little bit more interesting. I did a lot of research on it. So that's something that you do. You got to go back in time and you do a little research and you put a little bit of history into it. And it also gives you ideas for story fodder. So after you turn your 1 or 2 books that you've already written into a series by adding maybe 3 other books like I did, so I ended up with 5 books, I had to totally rebrand my series. So what I did was I thought, okay, what are the titles going to be? So I ended up changing lessons to Colson's Lessons. I changed Senator's Secrets to Colson's Secrets. And then the first book in the series, Colson's Wife, and like I said, that takes place in the early 1900s. The next book in the series is Colson's Crucible, and that takes place during the 60s and right around there. And then the next 3 are pretty much more in current times. Now, I didn't change it from the Colson series until Colson Family Saga until not too long ago, actually. I can't remember when exactly. So that's one of the problems when you do something like this after the fact. You know, you already written a couple of the books and you've already sort of done a branding and you have to go back and rebrand. So it's a lot of work because you're going through and you're rebranding, you're changing covers, you're changing titles, you're changing series names. So it can be a real pain in the butt. But do I regret it? No, not at all. I'm really glad that I wrote the book. And in some ways, I am not sure if I could have written Colson's series starting with Colson's Wife. For me, it actually worked out better. And I don't know why that is, but I had written this one story, and when you're a writer, which I assume most of you guys out there are that are watching this, and you're creating characters, and in some strange way, those little things that you write become story fodder for when you go back in time and write their story. So I don't know if any of that makes sense to you, but for me, it worked out. But I can see for it, it's kind of a hard way to do it in some ways, but in other ways, it's not. When I finished the last book in the series, Colson's Reckoning, I sat down, and when I read the whole series all together, I realized, I kind of wondered in a way, did I have a muse sitting on my shoulder helping me? Because it all sort of fit together puzzle-like from the very first book to the last book, and how the characters were very interwoven. I was really happy with how it turned out. And another thing that I realized was the series really was about women. It was about how women have evolved since the 1900s, how our strengths, and how we lived in a man's world for so long, but kind of found our place. I felt really good about that. In some ways, it was a little bit of a feminist book, in some ways not. I don't know if you would get that out of it or not, but to me it is. Now, the very first book in this series, Colson's Wife, some reviewers, if you read the reviews, it's a very bittersweet story. Now, my daughter, who is my cover designer, she reads all my books, she says that Colson's Wife is her favorite of all my books. She just really, really likes that book a lot. And it does have a very bittersweet ending, so it's not a typical romance. So if somebody is looking for this happily ever after, romance, they read, Colson's, a historical romance, they'll read Colson's Wife, but it doesn't quite hit that note. It's not that it has a real sad ending, but it has a very bittersweet ending. And something to remember with the series, even though each of the 5 books is a standalone book, the happy ending for everybody is really in the last book when it all comes together. And while maybe Mary Ellen from the very first book, maybe her life isn't as some of the readers want to be, but if her life wasn't the way it was, then the rest of the stories wouldn't be there. I mean, so sometimes you look back and you think if these certain bad things didn't happen, maybe some other good things, wouldn't have happened. So that's one of the things that I take away in the series, and like I said, I am really proud of it. Another thing that I notice when you do write a book this way, one of the sort of the pitfalls, because I wrote lessons 25 years ago, my writing style has changed considerably in the last 25 years. Even in the last 7 years, it has evolved. And I'll even, hear people will say that they've noticed a little bit of change in my writing through my Haunting Danielle series. After you write, 25 books, yeah, that's going to change a little bit. So that is one thing, and it's not that it's really a bad thing, but if you read Lessons, you will notice a little bit different tone and some things that I do in that book that I don't do in the first two or the last two as much. So, there is that. It's a little bit different. You can tell that the same person wrote it, but the style is just slightly different. I've been wanting to do this particular episode for a while because I did want to share with you how I wrote a series from the middle, because I imagine there might be some people out there that are sort of tempted to do this. And I know I've seen a lot of different YouTube videos where they do, writing advice, and one of the big writing advice is, you want to write a series, you have a book and you want to make a series out of it. Usually they say don't do it, or, they kind of, maybe it's not a good idea to, turn it into a series. And some books you probably shouldn't turn into a series. But if you feel really passionate about one and you really feel that you want to expand on it, it is possible. But you have to be aware of the pitfalls, and the pitfalls are, there's a lot of rebranding that has to be done. You'll probably have to change your title. You'll have to change your series name. You're going to have to republish. It's a lot of work that way, and you're going to have to really, that. But it can be done, and I was real happy with it. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this episode now is because Dreamscape Media purchased the audiobook rights to the Coulson family saga. And the first 4 books have already been released, and book 5 will be released the end of June. Now, I am absolutely thrilled with how the first 4 books have turned out. Now, for those of you out there who have written books and you want to put them in audiobooks, I personally have never done the self-publishing on the audiobooks. I just feel that I don't have the expertise for that. And so when Tantra Media first approached me on my Haunting Danielle series, I made a deal with them, and I was very happy with it, and I really love my narrator for the Haunting Danielle series. So then when my agent brought me this offer from another audiobook publisher, Dreamscape Media, and it was for the Coulson family saga, I was really excited because I have no desire to, publish them myself. I have enough to do with the other self-publishing. So one of the things I have asked for was the rights to approve the narrator. Now, I think that's really important because I have friends who have had their audiobooks done by different people, or they've done them themselves, and they have been very unhappy with the results because the narrator, they just didn't do a good job, or just didn't sound right for the series, or whatever. And I have listened to a lot of audiobooks, and sometimes, the narrators can be really annoying, and sometimes they can be wonderful. Now, for me, I was so happy with my Haunting Danielle series and that narrator, so I was really a little bit nervous when this one came around, because I knew that it was going to take a different type of narrator than I had for my Haunting Danielle series, because it's a total different kind of book. Now, for my Haunting Danielle readers, warning, the Coulson family saga, it's very R-rated. There's going to be curse words, there's going to be sex, there's going to be violence in it. That's the Coulson family saga is, a little bit grittier than the Haunting Danielle series. So I really wanted a narrator that could carry that series off in the same way my other narrator did. And so I listened to a number of them that they sent me, and I am really thrilled with the one that I finally, settled on. I have been so happy with how she read all the books. Now, one of the things that was a little unsettling for me, when I said before that, I wrote Lessons 25 years ago, and I would probably maybe write it a little bit different if I was to write it now. There's a lot of sex in Lessons. Now, back when I wrote that book, it was a time when I read a lot of romance, and the romances that I read back then, the popular romances during that era, the level of the sex in the Lessons is comparable. It's not like I went out into erotica land or something. But it still was a little bit shocking to me to listen to it, because I've been so engrossed in my Haunting Danielle series, and we don't really have any of the sex in that particular series, but I decided to kiss her so once in a while. So that was a little different for me, but the narrator did a wonderful job. I just love how she carried off the series. In fact, I even cried in a couple spots, some of the different scenes that she read. So that, it's for an author, I think that's really a great feeling when, It's kind of like, I guess, if you were an author and sold your work to a movie and they put a movie out and you really liked how they did your book and you felt really good about it, as opposed to, you know, they make a movie of your book and they just screw it up and it's like, oh, this isn't even my book anymore. So that's kind of what I experienced. Is I had the good one, is I really feel happy with it. So that's why I wanted to do it now, is because I really do, I was really happy with how it all turned out. So I'm looking forward to it in a few days. 4 days the book comes out, but I actually have it in a way. They also put out the CD versions, so you can get it on CD audiobook, or you can get it on digital, like through Audible or some of the other places where you can do download ebooks. So I think that's about all that I want to talk about today. So if you're going to take one of your standalone books and turn it into a series, good luck. I hope it works out for you like it did for me. And other than that, right on.